Go on. Try to stop me, he said, smiling over the fence that was bolted 6 feet into land with my name on the deed. My name is Rowan Pierce. I'm 47, and for 22 years I've walked survey lines in rubber boots, read topo maps until the contours blurred, and argued wetland setbacks with people who thought the word mitigation meant pay to play. I work as an environmental compliance consultant in Western Oregon, and I can quote our state's riparian buffer law the way some folks quote baseball stats. So when my neighbor, a man who wore wealth like a cologne, planted a gleaming steel fence straight through the protected buffer that guarded the creek behind our homes, I didn't see a boundary dispute. I saw a detonator pushed into a powder keg. He stood there with his hands on his hips, the sun sparking off his watch. Really, Rowan, what are you going to do about it? His name was Tristan Hollis. He'd rolled in 2 years earlier on the crest of a tech IPO, purchased the old Calder place, and erased it. In its place rose a glass and stone palace that looked like a museum for rich people's furniture, cantilevered decks, a pool that pretended it was part of the creek, even an outdoor kitchen larger than my entire living room. He liked to say the house honored the landscape. Standing on my side of the line, looking at the fence posts stabbing through sedges and rushes, I thought of other words. I'll handle it properly, I said. He smiled wide, tugged his aviators down his nose, and gave me a look I've seen in boardrooms and on construction sites. A look that says, you're an obstacle, not a person. Be my guest. I had it surveyed. Lawyers reviewed it. This fence is staying. Behind him, through a wall of glass, his wife Lila watched us from the kitchen. She lifted a hand in a tentative wave. Out on the lawn, their twin boys chased a soccer ball and shouted like sparrows. It looked so normal, family laughter, green lawn, a brand new fence shining like a sword. I could taste the iron in my mouth. It's not about the fence, Tristan, I said. Everything is about a fence, Rowan. Lines in the dirt. You either get them or you get rolled. He turned, pleased with his own cleverness, and strolled back toward the house. I stayed where I was, feet in my wool socks damp from the morning grass, and watched the breeze shiver the reed canary grass along the creek. I watched the reflection of his mansion tremble across the water's skin, and I decided that if he wanted a line, I'd give him one. I went inside, took the faded plat map from the drawer I keep for stubborn problems, and spread it across my kitchen table. The paper was the size of a bedsheet and smelled faintly of mildew. The original survey had been done, I knew, when the county still drafted by hand. The last update came 15 years ago when I bought my place. I traced the meets and bounds with a fingertip I'd sliced on field flagging a dozen times. I knew this line. It ran along a black cottonwood, hit a half-buried iron pin, and jogged back toward the gravel pull-off by the road. And for 30 feet on either side of Alder Run, our creek, the law said, no permanent structures. Not a shed, not a patio, not a fence. The buffer existed because the water did, and because salmon did, and because, whether or not a man in sunglasses believed it, the water keeps receipts. I measured the span where Tristan's fence cut across my property. 200 yards from the road to the break in the blackberry tangle where the slope fell toward the creek. The crew he'd hired had done good work. Laser straight, deep set, galvanized posts, tension wire tight enough to sing. Someone had pulled the orange survey flags I tied along my line last year. They lay in a little heap, trampled into the mud. I took pictures from my side with my phone, close-ups with a scale card, wide angles showing the fence in relation to the old alder stump that marked the northeast corner pin. Then I knelt at the edge of the grass and pressed my hand into the soil. It came away smelling like rain and clay. This strip held frogs in spring and dragonflies in summer. In late October, coho nosed into the gravel and made bright nests called reds. The babies, little slivers with one brave eye, hid in the rushes until winter storms swelled the creek high enough to carry them to the river. It wasn't a drainage ditch, as I knew Tristan liked to call it to guests. It was a nursery. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and brought the laptop to the table. My login to the state watershed portal still worked, and the map loaded with a familiar delay, the colored layers stacking themselves. Stream classification, critical habitat, floodplain. I pulled the permit files for the Hollis parcel. I'd asked for copies as a professional courtesy when he broke ground. Old habit. I don't snoop. I do remember. The permits were there, pages of them. Site plan. Geotechnical assessment. Wetland delineation stamped by a firm out of Salem. Mitigation plan signed by a project manager I'd once debated on a panel about stormwater. The plan looked good on paper. The house footprint stayed outside the 30-foot buffer. The pool straddled the outer edge, but the design specified permeable pavers and a bioswale to catch runoff. And then, important, there was a condition of approval. Post-construction compliance inspection within 6 months of certificate of occupancy. I flipped through the scanned pages. There was no record of that inspection. Not a notice. Not a scheduling email. Nothing. The box labeled post-cons check sat there blank like a missing tooth. I made notes. I pulled satellite images from the day the roofing went on and compared them to the permitted site plan. The house looked closer to the water. I measured twice. It wasn't my eyes. The footprint was off by at least 15 feet, slouching toward Alder Run like a drunk leaning on a bar. I sat back and rubbed the grit from my jaw. The fence was a bright insult, planted where anyone could see it. But the bigger thing, the thing that would matter, was quiet. And it was old. It had been poured in place months before the first truck delivered fence posts. I thought about the Calder farm and the day old Mrs. Calder signed the deed in my kitchen. She'd been 80 then, hands thin as parchment, eyes wet when she looked toward the pasture. It was good land, she'd said. My boys fished that creek after school. I'd promised her I'd keep it the way it was. I can't stop the county from approving new homes, but I can keep a promise to a woman who handed me the keys to a history. That evening, as dusk slid down the trees and the chorus frogs struck up their spring choir, I called someone who wouldn't laugh at setbacks or buffers. Watershed Enforcement, a woman answered. Her voice was brisk without being harsh. Inspector's office, Rowan Pierce here. Consulting license ends in 1742. I've got a probable setback violation in a designated salmon corridor. New fence inside the buffer. House footprint looks off from approved plans. Post-construction inspection appears to have been skipped. Address? She asked. I gave it. Alder Run, East Bank. Hollis parcel. She was quiet a second, typing. We have permits on file for a major residential. You said the post-const wasn't completed? Not in the system. And the as-built doesn't match the permitted site plan from what I can measure. I'm forwarding this to compliance. I'll flag it high priority due to habitat designation. How soon? We can be on site within 48 hours, she said. Name's Jamie Ortiz. I'll bring a field tech. Thank you. When I hung up, I went out to the deck with my coffee and watched the last light collect in the slow bend of the creek. An owl sailed over the water soundless as thought. I wondered if Tristan slept in a house that glossy. Some people believed money softened consequences. It doesn't. It just makes the reckoning cost more. By morning, the neighborhood knew there was a situation. That's how Mrs. Polk, 2 houses down, a widow with soft hands and geraniums that survived anything, described it when she stood at my mailbox with her dog's leash looped around one wrist. He says there was a misunderstanding about the line. She told me in a careful voice, like she was standing on a sheet of ice she wasn't sure would hold. He said he's happy to pay you for the strip. He built inside the creek buffer. I said, it's not a strip you can buy. It's the law. Her eyes darted toward his place, toward the glass-catching sun. He brought me lemon bars when I came home from my surgery. Lemon bars don't move a fence, I said, and immediately hated how sharp I sounded. Sorry, I know he means well when he's not bulldozing things. She patted my arm. You always helped us after the floods, Rowan. You explained why the water needed room. Do what you do. I was in the field that afternoon marking the old iron pin with fresh flagging when a white SUV with police decals turned into my gravel. A man with a fair face and a receding hairline stepped out, one hand resting lightly on his duty belt. Mr. Pierce, that's me. I'm Officer Delaney with City Police. We got a call from Mr. Hollis that you've been threatening him. I wiped mud from my palm on my jeans. He called you. He said you made veiled threats about his family and property. Did he say what the threats were exactly? He said you told him you'd handle it, and he didn't know what he'd done, and that you were making calls to authorities to ruin him. I need to hear your side. I told him I'd handle a fence that's inside a protected buffer. I filed a complaint with Watershed Enforcement, which is what citizens are supposed to do when they see a violation. No threats. No contact with his wife or kids. I don't talk to children about fences. The officer studied me like he'd seen his share of neighbor disputes that turned into weeks of paperwork. You mind if I take a walk with you to the line? I'd prefer you stay on my side, I said. But sure. We walked to the fence. He took a look at the creek and the sedges and the fence posts gleaming where they shouldn't. We had a seminar last year, he said. They told us about these buffers. Said fences count. They do, I said. So do patios and fire pits, and just a few extra feet for the pool. He nodded and scribbled something in a notebook. I'll note this in the call. We're not environmental cops, but I can put in that you're going through the right channels. Appreciated. As he turned to go, he hesitated. Between you and me, he called twice. Once to dispatch, once to the station. He likes to be heard. I've noticed, I said. Late the next morning, a white pickup with state plates rolled up in front of Tristan's place. Two people stepped out, Jamie Ortiz, the voice from my call, and a younger woman wearing orange survey boots and a cap that read Field. They didn't knock. They didn't have to. They were there on official business, and their badges opened any door the law allowed. But the door opened anyway. Tristan came out with a smile he'd practiced in mirrors. I watched from my porch, coffee cooling in my hand. He gestured toward the fence, toward his house. Jamie showed him a clipboard. His smile leaked away. The field tech, Maya, I learned later, set up a tripod and began taking GPS shots. She moved like she'd done this 1,000 times. Clamber over the alder roots, hold the pole steady, wait for the unit to beep, write a number, move again. They took readings at every other post, then down the slope, then across the little tongue where the pool deck nudged toward the stream. Jamie paced with a roll tape, checked an angle against the plat, and wrote notes in tight block letters. By noon, they crossed the line onto my side. I met them halfway. Mr. Pierce, Jamie said, offering a hand. Thanks for the documentation. Glad you came. Maya thumbed the damp brim of her cap. Your photos showed a good control point at that alder stump. The iron monument is under it. 6 inches down. You can feel it with a probe. She grinned and nudged the soil with her boot. Already did. We walked the length of the fence, and I pointed out where the floodwaters came each November, where the frogs laid egg strings like glossy commas on the reeds, where the salmon dug into clean gravel. Maya took one last reading and jotted a number. The fence is inside the buffer by 6 feet the whole way, she said. And the pool deck's inside by more than that. Jamie looked up at that, then passed me at the house. Your records showed no post-construction inspection. That's a problem. It's a big house, I said. Big houses cast big shadows. They thanked me and returned to Tristan's side. He stood now with his arms crossed tight to keep from wringing his hands. He talked fast. He pointed at the permits. He gestured toward the water like he was negotiating with a river. Maya shook her head once slow. Jamie left a paper on the porch. By late afternoon, a courier carried a certified letter back up the steps. I saw Tristan take it, sign the green card, tear it open. He sat down hard on the top stair. Lila came to the door and asked something. He didn't answer. For the first time since his contractors rolled a bulldozer into the old orchard, the man looked small. I didn't go gloat. That's not how consequences work. I grilled a cheese sandwich and ate it standing up at my sink. While I chewed, my phone buzzed. It was my daughter, Tess, calling from Corvallis where she studied environmental policy. I saw a post, she said, voice tight. Hollis wrote something about a neighbor weaponizing the state to attack a family home. People are commenting. He built a fence in a salmon buffer, I said. And his house isn't where his permits say it is. Is this going to get ugly? It's already ugly. But I'm going to let the process do its job. You okay? I looked at the creek, at the soft green that settles over it in April. I'm steady, I said. That's enough. 2 days later, a notice of violation was posted on Tristan's door and mailed certified to his attorney of record. It listed 3 counts: construction of permanent structure within a riparian buffer, failure to obtain post-construction compliance inspection, and deviation from permitted site plan resulting in encroachment into protected habitat. It gave him 10 days to respond and 30 to propose corrective action. He didn't waste his 10. He hired a law firm with a reception desk that looks like a glacier and fired off a letter thick with phrases like de minimis and selective enforcement. He called 3 people on the city council and left long voicemails about jobs and taxes. He phoned my phone 11 times in one night and hung up after 1 ring. Probably so he could say I'd been calling him, not the other way around. He posted a video where he stood in front of the fence and said, I believe in the environment, But I also believe in common sense. And it got shared by folks who shout about overreach when a ranger asks them not to drive an ATV in a stream. What he didn't do was move the fence. On a drizzly Tuesday morning, he came to my door carrying a bottle of wine so expensive it looked embarrassed in his hand. He put on a new smile, humble, or the closest he could get to it. "Rowan," he said, "I think we can work this out neighbor to neighbor. What do you propose?" "I'll buy the strip," he said, brightening because now he was in familiar territory. "Market value plus, say, 20% for your trouble. We can redraw the lot line. You get money. I get peace. Everybody wins." "The strip is not for sale," I said. "There's always a price." "There's a law," I said. "And that law is not a cashier." His smile cracked. "You don't have to be difficult just to be difficult." "I'm not. I told you the day you put those posts in, you were in the wrong place." He leaned in like we were in a loud bar, not under my porch roof with rain pattering on cedar. "Listen, you think this is about fish. It's not. It's about a man who worked for what he is being punished because a bureaucrat likes a rule. Do you really want to be that man's tool?" "I've been called worse than a tool," I said. "But I've never been called a liar by a creek." "You sanctimonious." He stopped himself, anger skidding across his face and scrambling to get its traction back. "Fine," he said. "Enjoy your moral victory. You'll be hearing from my attorney." "I already have," I said and shut the door. He stood outside long enough to make it awkward, then tromped back down my steps, muddying the boards I'd installed myself. The state moved quicker than his attorney. Jamie and Maya returned with a larger team. They spray-painted dots along the encroachment. They set stakes where the buffer line should have been. They documented the deviation of the house footprint with enough numbers to make any planner's heart sing. And because the law says what it says, they issued a correction order that made even me whistle: remove all structures within the protected zone and restore the riparian area to pre-construction condition within 90 days. Tristan appealed to the administrative hearings officer. He lost. He took it to the state board. He lost faster. He tried a Hail Mary in federal court, claiming a taking under the Constitution. A judge with spectacles halfway down his nose cited case after case confirming that if you build where you're not allowed, making you unbuild is not a taking. It's a return to compliance. Neighbor sentiment changed the way wind shifts when a storm swings around. At first they called me the guy making a fuss about grass. Now they came by with quiet questions about where their own buffer started. A local reporter asked to interview me. I said no and gave her the name and number for Jamie Ortiz. "The story isn't me," I told her. "It's the creek and the law." The demolition order arrived on a Friday in early fall. The paper was thin and official, the kind that crinkles like dry leaves. It listed the parcel number, the violations, the findings, the order. It gave dates and times. It included the schedule for restoration inspections, the check-ins that would last 2 years to make sure the planted willows took root and the reed canary grass didn't swallow the whole mess again. The fines totaled an amount that made even my stomach tighten. But the biggest cost wasn't on the paper. It roared up the drive on flatbeds the next week. The crew came at dawn, their diesel engines shuddering in the chill. They took the fence first. It took them less than an hour to pull what had begun all this. The posts came out in neat cylinders of wet earth. They rolled the chain link like a rug. When that silver line was gone, the place looked strangely naked, like a man who shaved after wearing a beard for years. Then they eyed the house. 2 excavators bit into glass and steel with jaws that could have chewed a car. Hammers pounded. Curved panels of window glittered for a moment in rising sun and then exploded outward in a sound like hail. The pool went next, the vanity trough that pretended it was part of the creek. The water slopped gray and oily as crews jackhammered the deck into chunks. The outdoor kitchen fell with a clang that echoed up the hill. It took days. I went to work. I came home. I watched a palace unmake itself piece by insistent piece. Lila and the twins moved out a week earlier. Someone said they were in a rental with a view of a different water. She sent me a handwritten note that I could tell had blotted under tears. "We made a mess of where we belonged," it read. "I'm sorry for my part in it." I put the note under my coffee maker, where I put other things I need to look at again later. I don't think she was a villain. I think she lived in a story someone else wrote for her. Tristan lasted 2 days on site. He stalked the perimeter with his phone up like it could reverse time. He shouted into it, red like a tomato just before it splits on the vine. He swore. He made speeches to anyone with a hard hat. They kept working. He cornered a foreman who listened with polite boredom until he wandered away mid-tirade to check a tie down. On the afternoon of day 2, the excavator bucket kissed the glass balustrade of the upstairs deck and sheared it clean off like a magician whipping a tablecloth out from under plates. Tristan made a noise I'd only heard once before, when a doe screamed after a dog cornered her fawn. It swallowed itself in his chest, and he left. By the time the last dump truck rolled out, the place looked like a surgery site. The raw earth was bandaged with straw. Core logs held the bank in place. Staked willows lined the water, leafless and hopeful. The environmental compliance crew walked the site with clipboards and green flags and the tired satisfaction of people whose job is to be disliked until they win. Maya set a final stake, wrote something next to a little box that said, "Planted," then turned to me where I stood on my own side with my hands jammed deep into my jacket pockets. "It'll be ugly for a season," she said. "Then it'll be green." "Everything we do right looks bad at first," I said. She smiled crooked. "That's the truth." Neighbors trickled down to the road to watch the transformation the way you watch a thunderstorm from a porch, fascinated, a little frightened. Mrs. Polk stood quietly with her dog pressed against her calf. "I didn't know they could make someone take a house down," she said softly. "They don't want to," I said. "Nobody wants this. But if the law's only for people without money, it isn't a law. It's a suggestion." She lifted her chin and looked out over the clearing. I can hear the creek again. So could I? With the pool pump silenced and the gas fire pit gone, Alder Run's voice came back. You could hear it sibilant over stones, the gentle vowel of water where it curled around a snag. It was like a friend had stopped whispering. News sites ran the story with photos of the excavators and a headline that called it a demolition. Comment sections did what comment sections do. Some people said it was too harsh. Others said it wasn't enough. The ones I read twice were from older men who wrote about fishing these waters with their fathers, about how coho used to flash in October like members of a royalty returning, about how they wanted their grandchildren to see that silver. Those comments made my throat hurt. Tristan filed for bankruptcy protection before year's end. He sold his company to a larger firm the way a drowning man sells his watch to buy air. A rumor said he moved into a condo with a view of a different creek, one bounded by concrete. I got an email from a city planner in a town an hour away. "We saw he applied for permits here," the planner wrote. "We're checking his plans more closely." Consequences ripple outward like circle after circle from a splash. The following spring, the willows leafed. They turned that soft, neon green that looks like hope sprouted. The sedges thickened. The short-winged meadow katydids came back and rasped in the evening. And then in late October, when the first fat rains pushed into the valley and Alder Run swelled up its banks with a satisfied sigh, I walked down at dusk with a headlamp, moved carefully to the riffle upstream of the old fence line, and stood in water up to my shins. A flash, then another. I clicked my light off and felt tears rise for the first time in a year. Coho. 2 big hens and a buck, all chrome and rose, working their bodies into the gravel like memories. I stood still as a shadow until my legs cramped, then stepped back onto the bank and whispered, "Welcome home." People thought I wanted revenge, that I'd called the state because I hated Tristan or needed to feel superior. Maybe those people don't understand how you can love a stream the way you love an old friend. Or maybe they've never watched something beautiful get eaten in neat, expensive bites until only a photograph remained. Here's what's true. When he shoved his fence into my land and laughed, I could have screamed. I could have pushed his posts over with my truck at midnight and started a war waged with ugly acts and insurance claims. I've seen those wars. They salt the ground. Instead, I measured. I wrote things down. I made the quiet calls that make loud things happen. I let the process be the hammer. It doesn't swing fast. It does swing straight. Lila sent one more note a year later. It came in an envelope with no return address and a shaky hand. "The boys saw salmon last month," it said. "Different creek, but they were thrilled. I told them once there were salmon behind our old house. I didn't tell them why we couldn't stay. I thought you should know that they're seeing what was supposed to be theirs." I put that note under the first one. On the day the state closed my complaint file, Jamie came by with Maya to remove a last flag. We stood by the water, 3 people in boots watching spring light pattern the surface. "Most folks only call us when they're mad," Jamie said. Mad you called us, or mad we showed up, or mad the law exists. I was mad, I said. Then I remembered mad doesn't fix streams. Maya kicked a pebble into the water and grinned as a cutthroat trout flicked to investigate. Anger is fuel, she said. We just run it through a cleaner engine. They walked the bank one last time, scribbled in their notes, shook my hand, and left. I stood alone in the quiet that comes after a battle you didn't want to fight, but couldn't walk away from. Little swallows stitched the sky above me, their wings catching sun the way the creek caught it in a million riffling shards. I ran my palm along the stump of one of Tristan's posts and felt the new sprout of willow pushing up through it, a green wand insisting itself into the air. People will tell you that money is power. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the power is a different shape. Sometimes it looks like paper with a case number at the top. Sometimes it looks like a person who refuses to be baited, who gathers facts like stones and builds a dam that no argument can blow apart. And sometimes it looks like silver fish threading their way back into gravel that only exists because someone long ago wrote a rule, and someone today had the patience to keep it. A year after the last excavator drove away, I rebuilt my own fence, 4 feet back from the buffer line, not because I had to, but because it pleased me to show a creek deference. I planted cascara and mock orange along the edge where the old posts had stood. When they flowered, the air smelled like honey. New people moved into the glassless lot, a couple who taught high school and asked good questions. They built a practical cedar place up on the knoll where the old orchard had been, well outside the line. I lent them my plat map and my post-hole digger. On the day they moved in, the husband passed me in the drive with a load of boxy furniture and said, "We want to do right by the water." "You can start by listening to it," I said. "I don't walk down to the bank to gloat. There's no one left to gloat at. There's just the water doing what water does, falling, swelling, thinning, carrying stories. I walk down to be humbled, to be reminded that my anger isn't a compass and my cleverness isn't the current. The creek is the thing. The salmon are the story. Sometimes I run into Tristan in town. Once, months after the demolition, I saw him in line at a hardware store buying a box of screws. He looked tired, older, his edges sanded. He didn't see me. I watched him pay cash and leave. I didn't follow, didn't speak. The law had already said everything I needed said. Mrs. Calder's grandson stopped by last summer and stood in my yard with his father's hands on a younger face. "Grandma talked about this place when she was in hospice," he said, scuffing his boot in the moss. "She said Rowan would take care of it." He gestured toward the water. "You did. I got lucky with good laws and stubborn women in offices with clipboards," I said. He smiled. She would have liked that answer. I think about lines a lot. Not just the lines on maps, but the ones in us. The line past which you won't let yourself be made small. The line you draw around a creek and say, here you get to be whole. The line you hold between consequence and cruelty. In the end, what I did wasn't revenge. It was refusal. It was a man who knew the rules insisting they matter. "Go on. Try to stop me," he'd said, smiling over the fence that morning. He thought power meant shiny posts and aggressive letters and neighbors whispering about the crank down the street. He thought it meant bending a world with a checkbook. But the line he crossed wasn't mine. It was the one drawn by water and fish and law. He ran 6 feet into it with a fence, then 15 more with a house he'd been told not to build. And the water said no in a language of notices and hearings and excavators and 2-year inspection cycles. It said no until the banks could breathe again. On an October dusk like the one when I first watched them return, I took Tess down to Alder Run with 2 camp chairs and a thermos of something that stung our throats and warmed our hands. We sat and didn't speak much. The coho came, luminous coin flashes in tea-colored water, and Tess squeezed my forearm hard enough to bruise. "You did this," she whispered. I shook my head. "The creek did this as soon as we got out of its way." "Still," she said. "Still." A great blue heron lifted off the far bank and arrowed upriver, its wing beats slow and sure. Across the water, the willows we'd planted were no longer sticks. They hummed with bees. The scar where a mansion had stood was now a meadow dotted with Indian paintbrush and lupin. You could fill your lungs there and feel something in you untangle. "Ready?" Tess asked after the light went almost entirely blue. "Not yet," I said. 5 more minutes." We sat there with our 5 minutes stretching into 10 and then 20, the creek talking and the frogs picking up their night part, my anger gone soft and useful as a worn tool in a carpenter's hand. When we finally stood and folded the chairs, I looked once more at the place where a fence post had claimed a piece of me. Lines, I said to the water that would never answer me with words. I kept mine. You kept yours. The creek kept talking its own language, oblivious to men who draw maps and build palaces and dare it to remember. It remembered anyway. And if a man like me helped the remembering, even a little, that was enough.